So chapter 7 starts essentially where chapter 6 left off, which is quite obvious, but also a very good linkage there is that Krishna is making himself the center. Chapter 6 ends that way, where Krishna says, of all the yogis, the best yogis are the ones that are essentially connected to me. Since that chapter 6 was about yoga, then it was quite a good linkage to chapter 7, where Krishna again starts by saying that, well, let's just read it. Text number 1, Krishna says, the Supreme Personality of God had said, now here, I'll send of Pirta. So this is Arjuna, to whom he's talking to. How by practicing yoga in full consciousness of me, with mind attached to me, you can know me in full, free from doubt. So again, it kind of connects chapter 7 and 6 in the sense that Krishna is really making himself the center, which opens up what I believe to be the, well, not what I believe to be, but what is, according to all of our teachers in our tradition of Krishna consciousness, and quite self-evident also, a whole new section of the Gita where it does become a lot more theological because of the fact that Krishna is now the center, right? So Krishna then moves on to explain that, again, based on this more theological aspect that starting with chapter 7, the Bhagavad Gita takes, Krishna then moves on in the beginning of chapter 7 by saying that he is going to explain essentially everything to Arjuna, knowledge which is which covers essentially the entire existence. We covered in last episode, which was the philosophy of ontology, like what exists in the world. And Krishna then declares to Arjuna that, look, there are essentially two things, spiritual and material things. Krishna uses, Prabhupada translates into phenomenal and numinous. And of the things that were material, Krishna then breaks it down into a Sankhya-like philosophy, which is a way to describe and categorize things in the world by saying that earth, water, fire, air, ether, mind, intelligence, and false ego were his energies, material, but nevertheless his inferior energy. And that besides those, there was another superior energy of his, which is spiritual, which is essentially the energy that comprises us, souls, right? And that everything that exists is they exist because of their foundation in one of these two energies. Then Krishna moves on to be quite poetic also in describing very beautiful ways in which we could therefore perceive God in the world, because if everything is his energy, one interesting question would therefore be, well, then how can I see it? How can I relate to God's energy in the world? Well, then very beautifully and very poetically, Krishna says, I am the taste of water. I am the light of the sun and the moon. I am the fragrance of earth. I am the heat and fire. I am the life of all the leaves. I am the penances of all ascetics. And I am the intelligence and powers of all people, right? So Krishna very interestingly even says, I am the strength of the strong, but in a very nuanced way. He then qualifies that by saying divine, devoid of passion and desire, because then that leads into a topic which I believe we'll be touching today, the nature of God, right? Is God all good and so on? Because if Krishna is saying, I am the strength of the strong, then we can say, well, there have been very strong personalities in history who were quite evil. So is Krishna that? Well, no, Krishna further qualifies it. He says, I am the strength of the strong, devoid of passion and desire, which is to say those people that are strong, Krishna is that strength of the strong people, But if you are devoid of passion and desire, then you are using that strength for goodness, for something which is good. So Krishna makes that differentiation there. And then he even goes farther in a very bold argument, I would say, by stating that I am sex life. And I think that's quite bold, because sex life among religion, among those that are very dedicated to religious life, is quite a controversial topic. We see a lot of very dedicated people, very dedicated to religious principle people are celibate monks and nuns. Those are supposed to be the people who have had the highest realizations about their particular religion and God himself. So, and they abstain from sex life, right? And sex is driven, if done in the wrong way, by lust in the material world, and has been the cause of so much sufferings and so much pain. So Krishna, in a very bold move, he says, hey, I am sex life, which you may be thinking, what? This is so taboo in religious doctrines, right? So how is Krishna claiming to be sex life? But then again, he further qualifies it by saying, which is not contrary to religious principles. So sex life, which is not contrary to religious principles. So what would be a religious principle in which we could apply sex life? Well, where the husband and the wife will come together with a sober and noble intention to produce a religious being, like an offspring, which will be taught religious principles, which themselves will grow up to become a representative of religious doctrines, religiosity, which helps the world. After all, a lot of our religious leaders were born to a father and a mother, and had they not been on earth, the earth would be in a lesser place. So if it is not adulterous sex, if it is not intoxicated sex, if it is a clear, sober, well-intentioned sex life with the intention to procreate, not the intention to enjoy, right? Which raises the standard. Like, we're not just engaging in sex life to enjoy. We actually have the intention and desire to engage in sexual activities with the purpose of begetting a child who we will love and protect and teach religious principles, so that that child can give continuity to the religious mission. Krishna says, I am that, in a very bold move, right? So again, these are all then the beautiful ways in which Krishna describes himself as the material inferior energy, which then will take us right to where our last class started and the previous one ended. So how is that for a context, Kim? Anything that you want to comment on so far?
No, I really enjoyed that. I appreciate how you were pointing out how things can be misconstrued, like Krishna's talking about strength or sex or desire, and then how Krishna anticipates that it could be misconstrued and then further qualifies it. So it was really a really nice journey through the text. I enjoyed that.
Right. Again, the question may arise of God's personality, God's position. Is God all good? Like, where does evil come from, right? And one of the reasons why I am so attracted to our theology is that it is truly really well thought of. Like, it doesn't leave anything unturned, and we are exploring everything for the sake of true knowledge that can lead us to self-realization, right? And lead us to less suffering, and lead us to more compassion and love, which is ultimately the energy that brings us back to God. So with that purpose in mind, our theology / philosophy explores so much of what there is so that in our minds, there's no doubt that what we are following is bona fide, and it does not require any dogmatic faith in some kind of book doctrine, but instead it's like let's take a deep, serious look at our existence in the world and what will the questions that will arise out of that. I think a very old one, very much explored one, is like, what is the nature of God? Does God exist? If you accept that God exists, and if we are past that debate, and then now we can dive into then what is the nature of this God? Is he all good? Well, I would say all religions would claim that God is all good, but then people's experience in the world is that, well, but there is suffering. There are bad things that happen to seemingly good people. And even my own mind sometimes is bombarded by bad things, such as bad thoughts. So what is that all about, right? Because another part of but let's say another part of truth is that God is that from which everything comes. And another part of truth is that God is all good. Naturally, the contradiction may arise, the paradox, I would say, where a paradox is a seemingly contradiction, but not really. It's something that forces us to investigate it further. So it's not necessarily a contradiction, but it's a paradox, right? So the paradox may arise, well, if God is all good, which leaves no room for anything bad to exist within God, and if everything comes from God, and if in my experience there are bad things in the world, then this is at least a paradox, because if God is all good and everything comes from God, then where do these bad things that I experience in the world come from? So does this paradox, is it clear, Kim?
Yeah.
Am
Yeah, and I think
capturing it?
I think it's a question that everyone at some point asks themselves, and people I think who are more prone to ask themselves this question are people who are recovering from this dystheistic version of God that they grew up with in Protestants, Catholics, of this idea that God is going to condemn you to hell forever, and all this fear and resentment that can build up because of it. And so I was counseling someone about just through all of their experiences of suffering. And this person has had, just from the day they were born, being abused in an orphanage, and then getting into numerous abusive marriages, and then now being estranged from her children. And so it's a lot of suffering. And she's really grappling with the idea of, okay, I need to reject this God from my childhood, because that God is just clearly not beneficial to me. That God has caused so much pain in my life if I believe in that God. And so she's ready to just throw out the baby with the bathwater of, okay, I don't even know if God exists, but yet there's something that keeps pulling her back to questions with me about, basically like, convince me, is God all good? And so where I started with her was, first of all, asking, well, what would you accept as proof that God is all good? And that usually stumps them. It's a good question for anyone listening, where if you're having doubts or questions, curiosities about divinity, what would you accept as proof that God exists? Or what would you accept as proof that God is all good? And so she didn't really have many ideas about, well, I'm not really sure what I would accept as proof. And so I started to go into relating it to our society, about what sorts of societies thrive and what virtues and characteristics and traits of those societies make them thrive, such as compassion and helping each other and wanting to do good for each other. And so then that begs the question of what you had touched on earlier is, okay, I have bad thoughts. If, you know, our last episode and in this episode, we're talking about how everything's connected to God. Well, if everything comes from God, then where does these evil thoughts of mine come from? That's an argument, perhaps, those sorts of thoughts come from God. So I'm curious how you would address that sort of scenario, that argument.
Yes, everything does come from God. It would not be a complete theology or philosophically truth that some things came from God, but other things didn't, because then where do these other things come from? And then God is no longer the origin of everything. God is no longer the cause of all causes. So we do have to own it. Everything does come from God. And how Krishna says in this very text number 11, I am the strength of the strong, devoid of passion and desire. That creates a dichotomy, which means that Krishna is the strength of a strong person, period. That strength came from Krishna. Now, the person who possesses that strength, what is their state of consciousness? Is their state of consciousness one dominated by passion and desire? If that person's consciousness is dominated by passion and desire, they're going to become a dictator. And we have had enough examples of that in our history, namely Hitler, Mao, and Stalin, which together have been responsible for the violent murder of millions and millions and millions of people. Nevertheless, they were strong. And where did that strength come from? It came from Krishna. But their individual state of consciousness, combined with their own free will, misused that strength that was originated from Krishna. Now, similarly, anger. Would thoughts of anger, any thoughts that may bother us, that surrounds our mind, where do they come from? Thoughts of anger, for example. Well, let's analyze that. If I am an all good person, let's, Prabhupada, our original spiritual master, had such a simple way of introducing God as a topic. And I really like that because it makes it more practical and more reasonable. And he would oftentimes say, why are we trying to understand God if we don't even understand ourselves? That's like such a very simple question that we miss. It's almost as if you're having a conversation with a first grader who does not yet understand simple arithmetic, and yet we're trying to explain to them the equations of a quantum reality. Like there's no possible way that you're going to understand the intricacies of physics and calculus and so on if you don't yet have a grasp on arithmetic, on basic arithmetic, right? So his point was that why are we trying to understand God at this point, the point where we don't even understand ourselves? So since our understanding of God is that God is a person, then let's take a lot of steps down to our level and let's analyze us. If I was an all good person, and like truly, let's say in this thought experiment, let's make myself an all good person, not God, but a person that is filled with good qualities and devoid of any bad vice, right? Let's say that I am that person. And then I am, let's say who I am. Currently I am in a black body that is 6'7" in height. And I do like to exercise because I spent decades playing basketball. So I do have currently in this body a male body which could be used in a violent way, an aggressive, violent way. But I am a all good person. Hypothetically speaking, I'm not giving myself that title, right? It's a thought experiment. Let's say I am an all good person. So then now here I am, and I am walking down the street and I see another male, perhaps not 6'7", abusing a child violently, almost like to the point of rape. Let's say, it's after sunset and things are, let's say, very unfortunate for this child and giving the opportunities for this misbehaved male to be raping that child. And I see that, and I am an all good person. If I turn around and do nothing, am I really all good? I'm just going to completely ignore that unfortunate position of that child being molested and raped by this misbehaved adult. Would I really be an all good person if I do nothing? And if I do something to protect that child, let's say I use my physical capacity to go there and defend and protect that child who's being raped, am I not angry at that point? Am I not angry by having seen that unfortunate situation for that child? Am I not using my physical body to now engage in a violent act that is being driven by, in part, anger, in part, compassion for the child, but also I'm angry to see that and I'm going to engage in a violent act? Wouldn't that be a more wholesome, all good me? Because if I turn my back and do nothing, I would consider myself to be not an all good person, because where is my compassion? Where is my sense of protecting those that cannot protect themselves? So I would then engage in a physical confrontation with this person. And that would certainly be driven by anger, because I would have all kinds of adrenaline that my brain literally just produced and unleashed as a hormone into my body. And that adrenaline mixed with my anger is going to go and protect. Well, that is anger being used for good reason by an all good person. So that anger did come from me, but I am an all good person in this instance, in this example. So that is what Krishna is saying here. I am the strength of the strong, which is devoid of passion and desire. I am sex life, which is not contrary to religious principle. So sex life, in the example that I just described, anger, it is coming from Krishna, because everything does come from Krishna. But then now, what is the individual's current state of consciousness? Is it being driven by anger and lust and pride and greed? Or is it being driven by a quality of compassion? And then you're using that anger. So again, these thoughts may come to our mind, but as Krishna illustrated in the beginning of this chapter, we are not the mind. We are not that thought. That thought may come because it comes from God, meaning the potential for anger is there. The potential for violence is there. But how do you use it, or whether or not you choose to use it? Then that is up to the individual and their free will. So just because a thought of a bad thought comes to my mind doesn't mean I need to act on it. I am different from that mind. And especially, this is a bit metaphysical, not necessarily God, but minds, the subtle body, impact other minds. So if you are, that's why we are so careful with our association. If you engage constantly with people whose mind are evil, those thoughts from those evil people that you associate with will become your thoughts. Did that come from God? Not necessarily. It came from all these other minds whom you are associating with, who originally misused Krishna's strength, Krishna's original anger, the anger that I described. If I was an all good person, I would act in that anger, right? So how's that, Kim?
Yeah, that's an excellent answer. I appreciate how you once again qualify the differences in, say, an all good being versus us, who's just weighted down by layers and layers of lives, making bad choices with our free will, and then the karmic consequences of that. And I like your point about association too, about where are we wanting to go, who are we wanting to be, and association is really important because we are weak-minded, and when something becomes so easy and so accessible and it's just right there for us to grab and associate with and incorporate into our lives, it's good to give us at least a fighting chance to by hanging out with people with integrity and depth. So
correct, absolutely. Okay, again, that was a small treatment of a huge topic in the existence of God and his nature. I think we can certainly continue this conversation, but perhaps it would require an episode of itself to fully dive into this topic. And the good news is that we are standing on the shoulders of giants, right? Our scripture is so deep and profound. There's so much information about this topic. And there are so many bona fide teachers who, by their own example and lifestyle and dedication to truth, have been able to explain to us what the scriptures are saying in a very easy form that we can understand. So we can certainly continue to discuss this topic. You'd be great, I think.
Yeah.
And so how about we get back to where we are in Gita?
Yes, sounds good.
All right, so then Krishna said, I am the material and the spiritual energy, right? Everything comes from me. He even say, I am the heat and fire, I'm the tasting water, I'm the light of the moon and the sun. And he's saying, I am all that. Well, then it kind of begs the question, well, if Krishna is all of these things, why can I see him? Why can I not relate to him? Why can I feel him? Right? At least that question would come in my mind, which I think comes into Krishna's mind also, because that's what he describes next in the next verse. So text 13, it's where essentially where we left off 2 classes ago when we started this last class. So Krishna says, deluded by the 3 modes, which is good, goodness, passion, and ignorance, the whole world does not know me, who am above the modes and inexhaustible. So we are being introduced here, again, not introduced because we already spoke about goodness, passion, and ignorance, but Krishna is reintroducing the modes of nature, goodness, passion, and ignorance, pretty prominently as the thing, the one thing, right? Well, it's actually 3, goodness, passion, and ignorance, but let's say the material modes of nature being the one thing that keeps us from seeing God, keeps us from, ignorant actually from God, right? And that between us in our experience, in our existence in the world and God, there is these 3 modes of material nature that keeps us from knowing God, because that's exactly what Krishna is saying here. Deluded by these 3 modes, the whole world does not know me, who am above the modes, right? And then
so can we touch a little bit more on, to review what the modes are, the goodness, passion, and ignorance?
Absolutely, and I think it is a very appropriate given our discussion of, is God all good and so on. Because again, if I have strength and that strength came from Krishna, but I am ultimately an ignorant person or extremely passionate, well, then I have just described a Hitler-like person to you, who is very strong, not necessarily just physically, but in terms of the power that the person possessed, right? At one point in history, but who have used, or let's say misused, that power. And what was it? What caused it? Well, it is ignorance. It is that mode of nature called ignorance and passion, which really distracts us. Because now here we are, we have a day in which we have an experience of all 3 of these modes. We wake up and we may have a good intention. I'm gonna perform a random kind of kindness. That's driven by the mode of goodness. And then, around 8:30 comes, and then now it's time to get a little bit more competitive because you're going to go to work and you're fighting for another raise. And there's a lot of people that know a lot of stuff there. So then you're going to raise your intellectual capacity so that you can't be given a raise. Well, that's driven by passion, competitiveness, and you want more, right? That's passionate. But then on the way back from work, somebody violently cuts you off on the freeway, and there you are, flipping the finger at them and uttering cursing words. Well, and that's driven by the mode of ignorance. So in our day, we experience a mix of this of these impulses of goodness, impulses of passion, and impulses of ignorance. And our entire lives are like that, a very complex matrix of goodness, passion, and ignorance interlocked with each other, driving our behavior in the world. So much of what we do in our spiritual practice is to move us away from ignorance and passion and situate us strongly in the mode of goodness. In truth, it's quite complex. We can use an analogy here. We may or may not know that if you look at a television screen, essentially what we're looking at are three colors, right? I believe is like yellow, red, and blue. And is it? Yeah, I think those are the ones, right? Red, yellow,
Yes.
and blue.
Yeah.
And essentially that's all that we are seeing. But if you look at like a 4K definition TV, 5K screen by Apple, let's say, you see such crispy and like super high definition images that look so beautiful, these shots of nature and so on, right? Essentially what we're looking at are very tiny dots of red, green, and blue. That's it. That's all we're looking at. But they are so mixed in such a complex matrix, a network of them. And some of them are more prominent than another. Like in that tiny little dot known as a pixel, there will be more green, a little bit less red, and practically no yellow. But then another one of those pixels will be predominant yellow, right? And you combine the billions and billions and billions that may be there, I guess that many, in a 5K retina super high definition display screen from Apple, you see one picture. So that one picture essentially is how we see the world, but is mixed by passion, ignorance, and goodness, just like the television set. So these modes, they really drive us. If you are mainly driven by the mode of ignorance, you're lazy, you're a procrastinator, you can't get anything done, you partake in intoxication constantly, and that's the type of person you are. If you're predominantly dominated by passion, you're the type of person who's competitive and you want to achieve more, not necessarily bad, but very competitive, like you want more, right? You want more of something. And if you are predominantly driven by goodness, you're more compassionate, you're more altruistic, you're more philanthropic in your actions and in your behavior in the world. So these modes, they're very strong because who is the person that can say are above all of these three modes? Only God, or those that have attained complete self-realization and liberation from the clutches of material existence. So material existence means to be dominated by one of these three modes. And we can do another thought experiment and put this hypothesis to test. When we wake up, even though we are not our minds and thoughts, are we not in autopilot? Are we not just being driven by whatever contents we carry in our mind? And they will be either ignorant, passionate, or good. And we live our lives like that in autopilot, not really even being aware of the fact that we are not those thoughts and that we are not that mind, that we are truly souls made out of spirit that are above this mind and these emotions of goodness, passion, and ignorance. So it's actually quite exquisite system and very befitting that Krishna would point this out right here, right now, because again, I gave you free will for you to act however you want on material existence. However, I am above these things. I am above passion, ignorance, and even goodness. But we, on the contrary, are dominated by these impulses, and we live our lives in autopilot. And the religious spiritual processes are such that they will, little by little, move us gradually away from ignorance and passion towards goodness. And if we can be situated in a complete, pure state of goodness, that in itself is spiritual, right? That is like, let's say, our gateway to the spiritual realms. That will be our soul, again, being transparent. Does that give some food for thought about the modes?
Yeah, definitely. I like the idea, well, I don't like that we are in it, but the idea that we are in disillusionment based on being so entrenched in whatever mode we're in at that particular moment makes it easy to understand how we can just lose vision completely of anything of higher thought because we're so wrapped up in what's going on at the moment. And so to even consider that there is a being who has transcended the modes, it kind of blows the mind when you think about it.
Correct. And again, another thought exercise, right? If I am predominantly following my, like in autopilot, predominantly following the thoughts that will harass my mind, that are mainly passionate and ignorant, well, where is God? As far as my worldview is concerned, as far as me, who have the experience of being the center of the universe, and any other person who have the experience of being the center of the universe. And by that, I mean, you know, as we live our lives, are we not the center of our own universes? We're constantly thinking in terms of I and mine, like my job, my career, my family, or I want this, I don't want that. So therefore, our experience is that we are the center of the universe. So in that center of that universe, if I am predominantly in autopilot, being driven by ignorance and passion, where's God? I will never see God because I am just worrying about my lust and my anger, or my passion for more money and my greed, and I want more and more and more. And Amazon.com will give me more and more and more. But then I have to go and work more and more and more, and then become distressed and more, and become lusty and more. And there is no God. I truly cannot see God because God is above these modes.
Yeah, that's the autopilot description is really accurate because it does take a conscious effort for us to snap out of it, so to speak. All the teachings of the first 6 chapters that we've been focused on about how we're not the body, we are a soul that's just different from the body. And to actually start to pull us out of the autopilot mode and realize that, oh, I'm not my body, I'm not my mind, I can actually control my mind. These are the ways to do it, and to put all the pieces together to start to take steps towards getting out of autopilot.
Hence, when you partake into a serious and bona fide religious structure, the religious movement, these certain rules and regulations will be there. And like the one that we embrace is such that will ask us, if you want to, voluntarily, to no longer partake in intoxication or gambling or meat eating or illicit sex. Well, these are the things that are going to move us away from ignorance and passion and allowing us to be more fixed in the mode of goodness. So those are the things that we would not do. Those are the things that we vow not to engage in to our spiritual master. Now, the things that we do vow to engage in is reciting Krishna's names, who are above the modes. And by reciting Krishna's name, constantly chanting Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare, Hare Rama, Rama Rama, Hare Hare, and allowing our minds and meditating on that so that our minds are now associating with that vibration. We're being pulled out of the material existence and into a state of goodness that can eventually transcend all of it and become pure again. So in one sense, we can say the entire goal is to overcome the 3 modes of material nature.
Yeah, and you just brought up a really good point about our connection to God. And I recently watched episodes of the cult Nexium, and it was very interesting because, you know, you just mentioned how we take certain vows to give up certain things in our lives like alcohol and casual sex and all that. And so in that cult in particular, they encouraged a lot of restrictive behaviors as well. But the ultimate goal was to give allegiance to this man, this leader, and to only engage in, not only, but to engage in, certain sorts of behaviors with him. And just, it highlighted how when you have a bona fide tradition, in this tradition, the number one thing that they encourage, at least it's been my experience, is to chant to what you just said, the Maha Mantra. And that mantra is not, asking God for this or asking God for that. It's simply reciting the names of God, crying out to God, which that appealed to me so much, because I was wondering, like, what is this Maha Mantra? Like, what am I chanting? And I don't want to be calling on weird spirits and all that. And it's just so pure. And it's just you and God. It's not you and, okay, your leader or this person or that person. It's you and God, and that's the basis of where everything else comes from. So those are really important points to bring up.
And I'm so excited to move on to the next text right now, because it will highlight this aspect even more. So text 14, Krishna says, this divine energy of mine, consisting of the three modes of material nature, is difficult to overcome. But those who have surrendered unto me can easily cross beyond it. Now, again, we were discussing how chapter 7 becomes more theistic and elaborating on a theology. This is such a huge aspect of theology, which I know you're very fond of this topic, Kim. So I'm going to ask you to comment on it yourself, which essentially is what I believe to be the sum and essence of this text 14 here, which is the word surrender that Krishna used. So again, he says, hey, these three modes that we just talked about, which are the very things that will keep the whole world from knowing me, they are very difficult to overcome. And for God to think that something is difficult, please don't underestimate that, because he can do all things. And if he's saying that's difficult, right? Then he's saying this is difficult to overcome. But those who have what? Surrender unto me can easily, so something that was difficult now becomes easy, can easily cross beyond it, but it requires surrender. So can you elaborate on that, Kim?
Yeah, I always appreciate in the Gita, just in all the chapters, not just this one, how Krishna understands our human existence. Everything's so applicable. The mere fact that he brought up sex and a sexual nature, and even that topic, means that it was prominent even back then, and it applies no matter what year you're born in. And so he understands how difficult and daunting it is to be so entrenched in the three modes of material nature. And it's surprising to me when I read the word easily, you can easily cross beyond it. That gives me a lot of confidence that Krishna, who knows how difficult it is, that you can easily do it when you have surrender. So to me, the idea of surrender is so powerful. There is so much potential behind that simple act. And I think that it's an important point to really absorb, because a lot of us can hear words and hear lectures and read texts and think, yeah, that's great. That sounds great. I understand it. It's good. But to actually make the effort, take the tiny step of surrendering into it, or take that tiny step of surrendering to Krishna, taking shelter in a God again, and an all good deity, having that little bit of faith to do that step and surrender, there's the potential for so much, according to Krishna. So.
Yeah, very well put it. Thank you. I like to comment on this from a different point of view, which is the word surrender itself and the connotation that it carries in our current culture, which I would argue is negative, is bad, because who wants to surrender? We, on the contrary, especially in the American culture, we don't want to surrender, we want to conquer. That's what football is all about. You get all these really powerful men running towards each other with the intention to conquer one another. And you don't want to surrender. That is the most despicable thing one could do. Like you are weak, you are a coward, you have surrendered, you're nothing else. There's nothing honorable about you. If you have surrendered, you've been defeated, you lost it, you're a loser. I don't know how much more I can emphasize this. And all of that, I would argue, is connected to the word surrender. So how is it that we are now holding surrender in such a high regard? How should we then embrace the mentality of surrender, since it carries such a negative connotation in our present society? Well, I would start by arguing that whether we like it or not, we are always surrendered to something. And if you don't agree with, well, then you may say, I'm not surrendered to anything. I always do what I want. Well, who is the I? As per Bhagavad Gita, the I, the soul, is not the mind. And the mind is what most people think they are. And the mind is constantly saying, I want all of these lusty or greedy type of things, and I don't want none of these suffering and so on and so on. And then now you are going to act accordingly. So you have surrendered to your mind. Surrendering means you are working under the whims of that which dictates your actions. If whoever dictates what you must do, you have surrendered to that thing because you are doing what it says, tells you to do. So if we're currently acting to fulfill the whims of our conditioned mind, then we are surrendered to our mind. And what is the results of that? We get only distress, anxiety, depression, and more anger, more confusion. Again, you know, I'm just describing the world in which we live in nowadays. Those are the results. So we are surrendered to our minds. We are surrendered to the demands of our companies that we work for. We are surrendered in a good way, not necessarily in a bad way. I'm a father and I'm a husband. We are surrendered to the demands of our families because I spend my time in a way that will benefit them. So I have surrendered. That's what I do. I work for that purpose. So we are constantly surrendered. We are constantly the servants, like, of the mind, and therefore we are surrendered to it. So then now we are proposing that, well, if that is what we're constantly doing, to work for our master in a surrendered like state. Again, if I say, wake up at 6:30 in the morning, get ready, get in your car, drive to work. Well, not under COVID-19, but let's say you still got to get prepared and go, and you do it, then you have surrendered to that concept. You have surrendered to that ideal. That's what you're surrendered to. That's what you're doing. So we are always surrendered to something, to a principle, to a doctrine, to something. So then now the question would become, an intelligent person would then ask, well, then what is the best thing for me to surrender to? What are the biggest benefits that I will have if I surrender to God? Well, an eternal, full of knowledge, full of bliss life. To me, that seems like a honorable quest. And the biggest ROI, to be honest, there will be the biggest return on investments, rather than surrendering to my pitiful and whimsical mind, who in 1 minute is happy, the other minute is already bent out of shape, and the next day loves something, and the next month hate that same something, in a state of constant confusion, which transpires by divorce and anxiety and distress and et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. Like, I'm not interested in that. We have seen enough of that. There have been enough Hitlers and Mao and Stalins, and enough of confusion, enough of suffering. That's surrendering to our minds under passion and ignorance. Those are the results. We like to think that we learn by studying history, but in truth, the only thing that we learn by studying history is that we learn nothing by studying history, because we are constantly repeating the same mistakes. So then what is the worthwhile object to surrender to? What is the worthwhile thing to surrender to? Well, I think it would be difficult to postulate something that is more worthwhile of our surrender than Krishna. Since he's the Almighty God, since he's that from which everything comes, he owns everything, he's all knowledgeable, he's all good, and he's all loving. Then an intelligent person, having had those conclusions themselves, not dogmatically, but knowledge and realized knowledge, practice, experiences that are required by a particular lifestyle of sincerity and true bona fide association, having had that for a while, and having had the experience that Krishna is indeed the all-knowledgeable, all-powerful, and all-good cause of all causes, supreme truth, who can argue that that's not the most worthy object of surrendering to? So that's what we mean by surrender here. It's not a bad thing. It's something that we are constantly doing, except we are doing now, we are directing that towards the most worthy thing to be surrendered towards.
Yeah, that's a really good point. How everything, we're always surrendered to something. So being conscious of that. And I liked your example of the football players. We are in a society where we want to conquer and dominate and rule the world. And so the idea of surrendering to something positive or something that can benefit our life and not make us resentful towards what we're surrendering to is really beneficial.
Right. And that points out Krishna's, not only his we say Krishna is omniscient, omnibenevolent, and omnipotent, which is to say that he's all powerful, all good, and all knowledgeable, right? So Krishna is all powerful, and therefore he is able, by means of using his power, to easily allow us to cross beyond something which is otherwise difficult. But he also highlights his omnibenevolence, meaning he is all loving, like he really cares about us. He really loves us. And therefore he will. Like if you surrender unto me, then I will easily allow you to cross over this material nature, which is otherwise difficult. So it is highlighted. And then also his omniscience, right? He knows what it is that we need. And he's therefore prescribing that we surrender unto him. Because I really like something you touched on, Kim, that when Krishna is saying, hey, I am sex life, which is not contrary to religious principles, which means that Krishna knew, right, his aspect of omniscience, that sex would be something that is difficult for people to really cope with, use it in the proper way. Even then, since time immemorial, 5,000 years ago when he originally spoke Bhagavad Gita, and it is still relevant now. Well, he knew that. And therefore he's prescribing that we would engage in it, but only in a religious way. So then here, I think he highlights Krishna's power, goodness, and lovingness, because he's saying, hey, I can take you beyond something which is very difficult because it's all powerful. I will do it because I love you. And you know what? Now with all my knowledge, I'm going to tell you what is the one thing you must do in order to attain me. Surrender. And then you will cross over because I can and I will. And if you surrender, I will do it because I love you and I'm able to do it and I will do it. You know, so I think I like this verse for so many reasons. That's another beautiful one.
Yeah, agreed.
Then text 15 and text 16. I think they are combined. If we look at them combined, it's pretty interesting. Because then the other question would be, right? Okay, so the modes are difficult to overcome it. It prevents us from seeing you, even though you are everywhere. But if you surrender unto me, then you can easily overcome it because I will take care of you. Then the question would be, well, then why don't people do it? Like it would be the biggest return on investments. And then Krishna elaborates on 4 types of people who will do it and 4 types of people who will not do it. Again, highlighting the expert philosophy and social science that we have access to, right? Would you like to read those verses, please?
Sure. Text 15, those miscreants who are grossly foolish, who are lowest among mankind, whose knowledge is stolen by illusion, and who partake of the atheistic nature of demons, do not surrender unto me. And text 16, 4 kinds of pious men begin to render devotional service unto me: the distressed, the desirer of wealth, the inquisitive, and he who is searching for knowledge of the absolute.
I mentioned social science, and I'm gonna take a small tangent here. You know, the question is like, is this a bona fide tradition? Is the Bhagavad Gita a bona fide book? Is Krishna a bona fide God? And what is the empirical way of verifying that? Like a lot of atheistic scientists who argue that way. Oh, you guys are talking about pie in the sky. I'm only concerned with empirical evidence, right? Well, I think we can easily connect this to that, because if we accept archaeology and linguistics as a bona fide method of empirical science, we will easily conclude that Sanskrit, in which this book is originally written, is the oldest language, one of the oldest language known to mankind. And that this text was written, archaeologically proven, at least 5,000 years ago. And how could it be that such a precise and complete description of our mentality would be stated by a being other than God, by a being other than a being who is omniscient, who knew past, present, and future? Because the statements that you just read, stated by Krishna, would require a being who is very nearly omniscient, aware of past, present, and future. Because now Krishna is saying that those who approach me are either because they are distressed or desiring wealth or inquisitive or searching of knowledge. And I have sat with this for a long time, and perhaps even more important to mention, I have heard our bona fide teachers elaborate on this for a long time, and they have concluded, I'm talking our teachers, I'm talking about each one of them. I have about 4 teachers in Krishna consciousness that I really listen to, and their combined activities in Krishna consciousness would span over 200 years, I would say, of profound work, meaning working with people in the material world, presenting to them this knowledge of Krishna consciousness with compassion, with the intention to raise them to a higher platform. They have talked to thousands and thousands of people over 200 years, because each one of them now are in their advanced age, let's say mid-60s to mid-70s, and they have been celibate monks in Krishna consciousness. This is what I mean by our sannyasis, right? For 30, 40 years. So if you add up 40 years here, 40 years there, 40 here and 30 there, in their sincere quest to bring this knowledge to thousands and thousands and thousands of people, I am therefore saying this is about 200 years, and thousands of people, hundreds of thousands of people, I would say, they have interacted with. And they have all concluded that indeed, this is a fact, that the people that came talk to them, the people they approach, not only Krishna consciousness, but any other type of spirituality or religious tradition, is indeed because they were distressed. And we can ask ourselves, is that not true in our own lives? I'm suffering too much. I have had enough. I have hit rock bottom. There must be a better way to live my life. I am distressed. Therefore, I start listening to religious people. Or I am desiring wealth. And that doesn't necessarily mean just money. It could also mean money, but I am desiring something. I am desiring a promotion in my job. I am desiring a suitable spouse with whom I can start a family. I am desiring intellectual knowledge. I'm desiring something, right? Something that is wealth-like. And therefore I go pray to God. I'm going to listen to what God is saying. I'm going to try to behave in a particular way so that I can please God or a demigod or some kind of angel so that I can attain these things that I am desiring, right? Those people will also approach religious systems. The inquisitives, people that are, you know, asking questions. Oh, what is this? What is that? What is the ultimate nature of the universe? Where does everything come from? The Big Bang Theory is cool, but is that really true? How about evolution? Like if evolution is true, then how could God create a man? Because according to evolution, we were single cell organism at the bottom of the ocean, climb out of there, and then we evolved to what we are today. And quantum physics, and Newtonian physics, classical physics, and etc. Like I'm very inquisitive. So then naturally religion is going to be one of the things that I'm going to be inquisitive about. Then I'm going to be curious about, well, what did Jesus say? What is Krishna talking about? How about Muhammad and Moses, right? So I'm an inquisitive person, and therefore I'm going to approach a religious tradition because that's who I am. But then searching for knowledge of the absolute. Well, so first of all, I'm already aware that the absolute exists, right? Different than relative. This is really what we mean by Krishna, the original cause of all causes, the absolute truth, that which is never relative, it always existed, right? And I am searching for knowledge of the absolute. So see, in this state of mind, I am so much more focused. I'm no longer just inquisitive about all things at all levels. I have found the absolute truth, but then now I want more. I want to go deeper in that path. And therefore I'm going to approach a religious tradition. So this is an accurate description of thousands and thousands of years, at least 5,000 years. And to your point, Kim, if Krishna said it then, it must be that it had already been true prior to them, which was their past. And if Krishna was talking to to Arjuna at that point and stayed at that point, that was their presence. And 5,000 years later, which is where we find ourselves now, with the empirical evidence of the swamis I just described, are verifying that this was also the future that Krishna was talking about, and that it would be that way, and it actually turned out to be that way. And we have social scientists that also agree to this. And that's a fact. So how much more empirical evidence do we need to accept Krishna as a bona fide scientific being that does exist and actually care for us? You know, this is such an accurate description of every person that actually exists in the planet, in the past, in the present, and in the future.
Yeah, I like that you bring up the references to the swamis and the gurus who, I mean, they have thousands of disciples and they've met thousands more, and their data is concluding the same thing.
Why did you come to Krishna consciousness, Kim? Let's put our hypothesis to test.
Oh, I would say I'm in the third or fourth category, like desiring. I came to spirituality in the general sense of spirituality because of suffering. Definitely one of the distressed. And then coming into Krishna consciousness, specifically getting back into theology, that was more like, I want to make my life more complete. I'm not fulfilled. There's something bigger. I'm feeling a lot more fulfillment in life by studying this and the people I'm meeting. And so, yeah.
Right, like that meets the criteria. So you had some kind of difficulties, you had some distress, then you start looking into it. Then you found some people that seemed to know what they were talking about. So that made you a little bit more inquisitive. And then after some time verifying that they were actually speaking the truth, and you were more fixed in the absolute knowledge that they had, you became fixed.
Mhm.
So there you go. There's like hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of thousands of people plus one. So yeah, I mean, these texts, they're amazing, right? So then text 17, of these, the one who is in full knowledge and who is always engaged in the pure devotional service is the best. For I am very dear to him and he is dear to me. Like, so now again, that's Krishna just being poetic, being complete. He's talking obviously of the four types of people who would surrender to Krishna, those that are in full knowledge and are always engaged in pure devotional service would be the best. Because again, we already described the prior. Like if your desire of wealth, well, it's better than if you are not ever going to surrender to Krishna. But still you want something, right? It's not the best relationship you could have with God. Okay, God, I will pray for you and you give me a promotion in my job. So it's more like a business deal rather than a loving relationship. So, but still better than not surrendering to Krishna. And if you also distress, like, not to point the finger at Ukraine, because I was also the same. I was very much distressed and I wanted a better alternative for living life. And that's where I became more spiritual. So, I'm suffering so much, God, can you please help me? I'm suffering and like, pardon me, like, isn't it enough? Like, can you help me? And then, then I came to God. So, and then if I'm inquisitive, like, well, evolution and quantum physics and string theory and blah, 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 blah. It's like, yeah, okay, that's cool. But you're kind of like all over the place, right? So then, yeah, Krishna is highlighting here, which is obvious. It's like, yeah, but those that are fixed in the search, sincere search of the absolute truth, they're the best. And they're always engaging in my devotional service. And if that is the case, then I'm very dear for them. Like, it's not that Krishna is the dictator, Hitler-like leader that you're surrendering to. Like, no, on the contrary, I'm surrendering to Krishna, and Krishna is very, very dear to me. I am moved to work for Krishna based on love, not fear. It's not that I'm going to be devoted to God because I want to escape an eternal hell, but rather I want to serve God because I love him, because I really, like Tukaram said in our last class a few times, and I thought it was so nice, because I really want to put a smile in God's face. That's my motivation. I want to put a smile in God's face because it's really dear to me. That's me. I mean, that's who I'm aspiring to be. Let's say that's who Krishna is talking about here. So I'm in full knowledge, I'm always serving him, and therefore I am very dear to the person. And Krishna, being the ultimate reciprocator, he then finishes by saying, and they are very dear to me. It's not that we just surrender to Krishna and serving Krishna, and that Krishna is dear to us, but that we are also very dear to Krishna. So that Krishna loves us. Actually, Krishna loves us a lot more than we can possibly imagine loving him or anything else.
Yeah, and the idea that Krishna is so loving, because if we relate it to our society or our life in this world, it's kind of inconceivable to us that, well, this person doesn't know me very well. I don't know them very well. Why would they love me? And so to really open up to the idea of the omnibenevolence of God, that God is all good and all loving, and he's just kind of sitting there waiting for us to love him back. It really puts a different spin on our purpose in this life and our role in this world. And yeah.
And check this out, to your point, text 18. All these devotees are undoubtedly magnanimous souls. But he who is situated in knowledge of me, I consider to be just like my own self. Being engaged in my transcendental service, he is sure to attain me, the highest and the most perfect goal. I mean, that's bewildering right there. I mean, I don't care how charismatic let's say, Barack Obama was as a president, or good of a leader, someone like, Steve Jobs, or whomever we can think of a leader that is good, let's say, that we perceive as being good. I don't care how good they may be. I don't think they're truly thinking of those that serve them, that they're just as good as themselves. I don't think they're at that level, right? I don't think that, as much as I thought Barack Obama was a charismatic leader, I don't think he's looking at, I don't know, one of the members of his cabinets, like the Secretary of Agriculture in the cabinet of the United States of America. I don't think Barack Obama was looking at that person thinking, you know what, you are just as good as I am. You could be, the president of the United States and do a good job as I am doing. Nah, I don't think so. But look, but Krishna here, like, really, that's part of what we mean by being all good. Like, Krishna has no envy. Krishna has no second, how can I say, agenda, Krishna has been so transparent here. He's saying, look, when you attain that, like, you become a magnanimous soul and you are serving me and you're loving me and I'm loving you, and we have attained that spiritual loving relationship, and you're like in true knowledge of me, Krishna says, I consider you to be like my own self. That's God that we're talking about here. That's not Barack Obama. We're talking about God, the ultimate reality, the cause of all causes, the supreme person. And that person feels that we, the little us, are just as good as him. What type of relationship that would be? That would be phenomenal,
Yeah, and Krishna has so much confidence in us. It's amazing to me. Like, he is sure to attain me, the highest and most perfect goal. Like, there's just no doubt in Krishna's mind that this is so achievable and so possible.
Exactly, that's a great point. Yeah. And then I think text 19 was the last one that we covered, right?
Yes.
Can you please read it?
Yeah, text 19, after many births and deaths, he who is actually in knowledge surrenders unto me, knowing me to be the cause of all causes and all that is. Such a great soul is very rare.
I mean, a lot of things come to my mind when I read this, but I think the first one that comes to my mind is that in another part in Gita, Krishna says the following: from the top of the higher planets. So, okay, I'm going to take a step back here. So we have the view of three worlds. By we, I mean the Vedic culture, right? The top world is the heavenly world. So that's actually the heavenly planetary system. The middle world is like the middle planetary system, which is where Earth would be found. And then the lower worlds, the lower planetary systems, which are all hellish planets, right? So Krishna states in Gita that from the topmost of the higher planetary systems, all the way to the bottom of the lower planetary systems, these are all places of misery where repeated birth and death are taking place. So that's Krishna's appraisal of our reality here. That's what from Krishna's perspective, that's what he sees. From the top to the bottom is just repeated birth and death taking place. And then I read a text like this: after many births and deaths, and I'm asking myself, man, how many times am I going to go all the way up to a heavenly planetary system? How many times am I going to come back down to an Earth-like planet? How many times, due to my own misdeeds, due to my own misuse of my own free will, am I going to go down temporarily to a hellish planet? And then again up, and then again down, and then again up, and then again down, for innumerable times. Like, how many times am I going to have to again start school and go to the high school and then university and buy another house and suffer all the dramas and all the anxiety and all? Like, how many times is it going to go on and on and on and on, right? For me to then finally realize after many births and deaths, to be actually situated in knowledge, and then ultimately realize Krishna to be the ultimate cause of all causes. I rather do it now rather than later. I just, at one point, it's no longer attractive. Like, okay, sure, you want to go to heaven and be a demigod? Sure. For how long? 1,000 years? Sure, no problem. We'll make you the demigod of the wind. And you can control the wind and go to a heavenly planetary system and be there for 100,000 years. And then you come back down to earth. And then you are going to be having to decide between voting for Donald Trump or Joe Biden, and then you may get caught up in that. And then you may be like, you know what? Now forget Donald Trump, or hey, forget Joe Biden. And then you go protesting. And then somebody launches a gas tear on you. And then out of your confused anger, you get a knife and you stab somebody out of your anger. And you go to prison. And then in prison, you get raped. And then out of your magnified anger, you kill them. And then now you go in death row, leave this body, and you go to a hellish planet to account for the misusage of your own free will. Temporarily, but you do go there. And then you learn your lesson and you come out of there. And then you're back on earth. And then now you can be somebody like a Michael Jordan or a Kobe Bryant, who is very motivated by passion. And you're very dedicated to what you do. And you become very famous. And then let's say you do it all right. You become very philanthropic at the end of that. And you make a pledge to donate 90% of your wealth, which is something that Bill Gates and Mark Zuckerberg and people of the likes have done, which is very honorable. And because you have done that, you have again attained such good karma, and you're going to again be promoted to a heavenly planetary system, and you go there for another 100,000 years and you enjoy everything again. And then when that is done, you come back down again to earth. And then again, and then again, and then again, and again, and again. For how long? And Krishna says, after many births and deaths, so after many of these things, you are then going to realize that I am the cause of all causes. And you're going to surrender unto him. And Krishna says, that is a great soul. Right? So I rather just try to do it now and get it over with.
Yeah, and I like how he references surrender in this text, where he says, he who is actually in knowledge surrenders unto me. So in this text, to me, it feels like less of making a conscious choice to surrender. It's like, once you have the knowledge, surrender is just an afterthought. It just happens naturally. You won't even think about it. It's this knowledge is what makes all the difference in the world.
That is such an excellent point. I have a joke about that. Crazy man walks into the bank and stands right in the middle of it and says, I surrender all the money in this bank. People are looking at him like, what do you surrender if it wasn't yours to begin with, right? So nevertheless, crazy man had he surrendered. Hey, I've surrendered. Well, if we realize, just like crazy man realizes, that Krishna owns everything. Like Krishna is that from which everything came. He's the ultimate cause of all causes, right? If you have that realization, if you have that knowledge of Krishna, to surrender unto him is the most natural thing there is, because it wasn't yours to begin with. The entire universe belongs to Krishna. It's all Krishna's energy, like he said, earth, water, air, fire, everything is my energy. Everything belongs to Krishna. So if you have that realization, like you expertly just said, Kim, to surrender unto him is just natural. It's not a sign of weakness. It's just a sign of knowledge that you now recognize to whom everything belongs. And if that person loves you and is all powerful and knows everything, Yes, just surrender. It's just so natural. It's an afterthought.
Yeah,
Let
that's a
it-
good analogy. I like that.
yeah.
All
So
right.
that was it. That's where we ended, right? Text 19.
Yeah, I love this chapter. So it's I love getting into the theology. The verses are so poetic to me too,
Yeah.
talking about devotion to God, Krishna's devotion to us, and it's a really sweet energy.
Yes, I agree.
All right. All right. Well, thank you everyone for listening, and we'll see you again next week. Thank you, Tadeo.
Howdy
Haribol.
bo.